This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and today is Monday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. Most episodes of this series rank good cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition, but sometimes I also like to take a look at the game's worst cards. And that's what we're doing today with a look at the worst 9-mana cards. 9 mana is a lot. In fact, you can't even really count on getting that much mana on a consistent basis. So when you can cast something that costs 9 mana, well, it better win you the game. Unfortunately, that isn't something all 9-mana cards are capable of. As we'll see in this video, there are some truly awful ones out there. To show up in a list like this, a card can't ever have been a significant one in competitive Magic, it can't be widely played in EDH, and it also can't have been playable in Limited. This pretty much covers all of the major ways to play Magic, and these cards are bad in all of them. Alright, let's get started with my picks for the 10 worst 9-mana cards in Magic. At number 8, it is Tika's Dragon. When you pay 9 mana for this, you get a 5/5 with Flying, Trample, and Rampage 4. Obviously, this is a terrible rate for what you're investing. Sometimes you'll see people say that the dragon is a great creature to give a lure effect because of its Trample Rampage combination, but because it has flying, that isn't even a realistic way to utilize it. Basically, you get a really expensive evasive creature who is tough to block and can maybe win you the game over the course of several turns, but if you're at the part of the game where you're spending 9 mana, your opponent's probably doing something way more powerful. At number 9, it is Body of Jukai. The Body is a 9 mana 8/5 with Trample. In other words, it doesn't even attack very well, as just a couple of small creatures can easily take it down. That certainly makes the Body a worse French vanilla creature than Tika's Dragon, but it does try to make up for that with Soul Shift 8. When this dies, you can return a spirit from your graveyard to your hand, as long as it had a mana value of 8 or less. So if you can effectively set up your graveyard, the Body going down does give you a 2-for-1, which is certainly fine. However, it takes some pretty real setup, and the spirit you get back has to be pretty darn good to justify you paying so much for an 8/5 with Trample. At number 8, I have Depth Charge Colossus. This is a really new card on the list. While it is true that there were more terrible cards in Magic's earlier days, every now and then they print a brand new card that's awful, and that's certainly what we have here. The Colossus has Prototype, which means you do have some modality here. You can either cast it as a 6 mana 6/6 or as a 9 mana 9/9. Neither of those rates is especially impressive, but what really makes the Colossus awful is that it has a big downside. You have to pay 3 mana to untap it. Now, there is a little bit of upside there in the fact that if you have 3 mana lying around, you can attack with this and untap it to give it pseudo-vigilance, but that's the card's ideal scenario, and I'm still not very excited about it. More often than not, you just have a big, clunky creature. There really wasn't a reason to play this in the Brothers War Limited, and there isn't a reason to play it anywhere else either. If you want to spend a bunch of mana on a big old creature, this isn't where you want to be spending it. At number 7, it is Volley of Boulders. This is a red burn spell that costs 9 mana. It lets you divide 6 damage however you want among any number of targets. That can have a nice impact on the board, especially if your opponent's creatures are small and you can pick off 2 or 3. However, 9 mana is an insane amount to pay for this effect that can't even kill larger creatures on its own. The card's one saving grace is that it has flashback for 6 red mana. If you're paying 6 for this, you're getting a much more reasonable rate. However, the fact that it costs all red mana really limits the places where you can reliably cast this in EDH or elsewhere, and it certainly isn't enough of a reason to do something like go mono red. Even if you can discard this and cast it at the discounted rate, you're not going to feel like you're doing something amazing, you just won't feel like you're doing something awful. Unfortunately, the card as a whole is awful, and that's how it ended up here. At number 6, it is Thing from the Deep. This is a 9 mana 9/9 that has a text box that is entirely downside. When it attacks, you have to sacrifice an island or sacrifice Thing from the Deep. As you can see, the Thing comes with absolutely no evasion and can be chump blocked for eternity by 1/1 tokens, and if you're attacking with this, you don't really have eternity, because you're eventually going to start really hurting your mana base. At number 5, it is Leviathan, another massive blue creature that comes with downside. And in this case, it is actually downsides because this card has a massive text box and about 90% of it is bad news. It does have trample, so hey, at least it has evasion some of the other creatures on this list are lacking, but it also enters the battlefield tapped and doesn't untap during your untap step. And if you want to untap it, you have to sacrifice 2 islands. And if you want to attack with it, you have to sacrifice 2 more islands. So yeah, if you want to just do the normal kind of things you do with a creature, like untap and attack with it, you're going to lose 4 islands a turn. That isn't even remotely worth it. This card has awesome art and was a card I really wanted to be good when I was a little kid, but even little kid me quickly realized this card is terrible. At number 4, it is Heroes Remembered. So far the cards on this list have certainly been awful, but they do all impact the board in some way. That's not true of the top 4 cards on this list. They all have effects that generally aren't worth the mana or the card, and they don't add to the board in any meaningful way. That's certainly the case with Heroes Remembered, which is a 9 mana sorcery that can gain you 20 life. This kind of card can certainly fool new players. After all, you end up making your opponent do 20 more damage to you to beat you, right? But just gaining life for the sake of gaining life just isn't worth it in Magic. You might live longer, but if your opponent was already ahead of you, they're still going to win. And if you and your opponent were at parity, the fact you cast this might just mean they moved ahead, because they could be using their mana to do something significant. Now, it does have Suspend for only a single white mana, and obviously 1 white for 20 life is a good deal. But it comes with Suspend 10, which means you're going to have to wait for a very, very long time to ever gain your life, and when your opponent knows it's coming, they can plan accordingly. So, yeah, whether you cast it normally or suspend it, Heroes Remembered is awful. At number 3, it is Blessed Wind, another bad life gain card. This one is significantly worse than Heroes Remembered, and that's saying something. For 9 mana, this lets you set one player's life total to 20. This means it will never gain you as much life as Heroes Remembered can, as the best you're going to do is go from 1 life to 20. It does have the additional upside of being used against your opponent if they have more than 20 life, but no matter how you use this, it isn't going to deliver 9 mana worth of value. At number 2, it is Denying Wind. It's part of the same cycle as Blessed Wind. In Prophecy, there was an entire cycle of 9 mana winds that have huge effects, supposedly. The other 3 cards in this cycle deliver there, especially the black and green ones, but Blessed and Denying Wind are awful. Denying Wind will often have an even smaller effect on the game than Blessed Wind does. You get to pay the very low cost of 9 mana to search your opponent's library for 7 cards and exile them. I know it can seem alluring to cast this and take away your opponent's 7 best cards, but these types of effects pretty much always underwhelm, even when they cost a lot less mana. In 60-card formats, this kind of card can get a little better because combo decks are a real thing, but if you really want to disrupt a combo, if your plan for doing that is by playing a 9 mana spell, well, you're never going to be able to cast it before they combo off. In EDH, you can take away things like combo pieces or really strong cards, and it is a singleton format, but the awkward thing about doing this is that you're doing something that is very likely to have no impact on the game anyway. Was your opponent ever going to draw the cards you exiled? Do they already have a way to win the game? And obviously, if you're at parity or behind, paying 9 for this and not actually doing anything is likely to make you lose the game. It's almost like you're time-walking yourself, and you don't want to be doing that. And at number 1, it is Dichotomancy. This 9 mana sorcery lets you search your opponent's library for copies of any of their tapped non-land permanents, and you get to put them directly into play. When these things line up perfectly for Dichotomancy, you can certainly do something powerful. Well, outside of singleton formats anyway. Obviously, this is entirely useless against almost all EDH decks, the one exception being any deck that's built around a creature that lets you ignore the format's singleton rule, and there are a few of those, but that's definitely a corner case. There are plenty of situations where you simply can't cast this and get anything of value. Now, you might be saying, well, it does have Suspend at least, so you don't always have to pay so much mana, and that's true, it does let you pay less mana, but suspending this is just awful because your opponent knows it's coming and can just make sure they don't have tapped creatures the turn it resolves. Basically, this ends up being an awful fog effect even if you suspend it. In short, it's very difficult to get anything worthwhile out of this whether you hardcast it or suspend it. Now, the one place where it can get kind of interesting is if you combine it with cards like Sleep or Twiddle so you can actually get some creatures, but that's a whole lot of work and certainly far too slow in any 60-card format. And that's pretty much the only place you can play this card. So, those are my picks for the 10 worst 9 mana cards. If you want to get an awful return on your 9 mana investment, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, including many more worst lists, you should see the playlists on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.